I'm going to read a bit from the end of the book, but don't worry because it doesn't give anything away. It's about the painting, actually. Who knows why Fabricius painted the Goldfinch at all? A tiny, standalone masterpiece, unique of all its kind. He was young, celebrated. He had important patrons, although unfortunately almost none of the work he did for them survives. You'd imagine him like the young Rembrandt, flooded with grandiose commissions, his studios resplendent with jewels and battle axes, goblets and furs, leopard skins and costume armor, all the power and sadness of earthly things. Why this subject, a lonely pet bird, which was in no way characteristic of his age or time, where animals featured mainly dead, in sumptuous trophy pieces, limp hares and fish and fowl, heaped high and bound for table. Why does it seem so significant to me that the wall is plain, no tapestry or hunting horns, no stage decoration, and that he took such care to inscribe his name and the year with such prominence, since he can hardly have known, or did he, that 1654, the year he made the painting, would also be the year of his death. There's a shiver of premonition about it somehow, as if perhaps he had an intimation that this tiny, mysterious piece would be one of the very few works to outlive him. The anomaly of it haunts me on every level. Why not something more typical? Why not a seascape, a landscape, a history painting, a commissioned portrait of some important person, a low-life scene of drinkers in a tavern, a bunch of tulips, for heaven's sake, rather than this lonely little captive, chained to his perch? Who knows what Fabricius was trying to tell us by his choice of tiny subject, his presentation of tiny subject? And if what they say is true, if every great painting really is a self-portrait, what, if anything, is Fabricius saying about himself? A painter thought so surpassingly great by the greatest painters of his day, who died so young, so long ago, and about whom we know almost nothing. About himself as a painter, he's saying plenty. His lines speak on their own. Sinewy wings, scratched pin feather. The speed of his brush is visible, the sureness of his hand, paint dashed thick. And yet, there are also half-transparent passages rendered so lovingly alongside the bold pastel strokes that there's tenderness in the contrast, and even humor. The underlayer of paint is visible beneath the hairs of his brush. He wants us to feel the downy breast fluff, the softness and texture of it, the brittleness of the little claw curled about the brass perch. But what does the painting say about Fabricius himself? Nothing about religious or romantic or familial devotion, nothing about civic awe or career ambition or respect for wealth and power. There's only a tiny heartbeat and solitude, bright sunny wall and a sense of no escape. Time that doesn't move, time that couldn't be called time. And, trapped in the heart of light, the little prisoner, unflinching. I think of something I read about Sargent, how, in portraiture, Sargent always looked for the animal in the sitter, a tendency that, once I knew to look for it, I saw everywhere in his work, in the long, foxy noses and pointed ears of Sargent's heiresses, in his rabbit-toothed intellectuals, in leonine captains of industry, his plump, owl-faced children. And in this staunch little portrait, it's hard not to see the human in the finch, dignified, vulnerable, one prisoner looking at another. But who knows what Fabricius intended? There's not enough of his work left to even make a guess. The bird looks out at us. It's not idealized or humanized. It's very much a bird, watchful, resigned. There's no moral or story. There's no resolution. There's only a double abyss between painter and imprisoned bird, between the record he left of the bird and our experience of it centuries later. And yes, scholars might care about the innovative brushwork and use of light, the historical influence and the unique significance in Dutch art, but not me.
Now, I imagine there's possibly less than 1%.
I'm happy that people wait and remember. It does seem a strange pattern, and it's nothing that I ever set out to do, but they take a long time to write. I write big books, but I'm painting a wall-sized mural with a brush the size of an eyelash. I work very small, but in big form, so that's why they take such a long time.
But I read that you said that, authors, or somebody was saying that authors are always asked where does the idea come from in the first place. But I know that the idea came from Amsterdam, but before you even wrote The Little Friend.
It did. Time I spent in Amsterdam, from notebooks that I kept. I keep notebooks all the time, and I'm always writing things in the notebooks, and most of what I write is, I keep my notebooks very much in the sense of an artist's sketchbook. A hand, a face, a bottle, a glass, little things that don't fit together, a tree branch, just little bits and bobs, and some of it makes its way into...
Do you draw or write?
I write, but sometimes if I can't catch something quickly enough, I will draw it. When I first began writing when I was a child, I would make little books out of construction paper, and they were as much drawn as written. The drawing fell away over the years, but they're disjointed pieces in the sense that an artist's sketchbook is. If you look through an artist's sketchbook, that you'll find fragments of this, fragments of that, and some of them will make their way into finished paintings, and some of them won't. But my notebooks are exactly this way, and some of the end of the book about Amsterdam was written over 20 years ago, written right around the time I finished The Secret History, when I was in Amsterdam over a long stay. And I didn't know it would fit into a finished book. I mean, it might not have found a home, but somehow, years later, it linked up with other ideas. I was very disturbed about the destruction of the great Buddhas at Bamiyan, and exactly why this inspired me to tell the story that I decided to tell, I can't say, but that was where I got the idea to write about an endangered piece of art, about terrorism, and about... It was so horrific, the idea of these great serene presences, which had been there for centuries, intentionally destroyed. This was before 9/11. It was the pre-tremor of 9/11. It was the pre-shock, the sort of shock that you have before the big earthquake. And there's something very wrong in the fiber of reality, just a horrible shimmer of something very dark. And it really stayed with me. And somehow that fit together with Holland, with my love of Dutch painting, also with a sort of dark, creepy Park Avenue mood that I was interested in. And spoiled, but spoiled in the sense of airless and claustrophobic. So those three things sort of came together in a way I wasn't expecting.
But again, writing for the second time from the perspective of a man, a young boy, Theo Dekker. So was Theo a very early part of this story?
His voice was always very much with me, and it differs from my own voice in some respects, but it's not a million miles away from my own. So there's nothing I wouldn't read necessarily. I tend to know. When I'm writing all day, I long for my book at the end of the day, and I'm always very much looking forward to it. That's my treat. And so it's chosen very carefully. I only read what I want to read and not what I feel I should. But often what I want to read is something that's being plowed back into the book. So a book that was never far from me while I was writing this was Seymour Slive's Dutch Painting, which is a masterpiece of a book, the study of Dutch painting. But I will also, at the end of the night, pick up a volume of poetry. As sometimes that's a wonderful way to sort of cleanse your palate. Go to sleep reading James Merrill, or actually even Ezra Pound, and go to sleep sort of dreaming of China.
Well, you had a long time to dream over the piece, but when we met, you said something that really surprised me. I mean, you said that you'd had lots of great patches of writing, brilliant patches, but you had an 8-month detour. And we really didn't get a chance to explore that very much. And I'm interested in that because you also talk about the fact, we were talking with your editor in Slate about not showing work half done, or like a bird will be scared from the nest if someone comes and looks in. That 8-month detour, was that helped by anyone but you? I mean, what happened?
What happened, I had to go through this long passage before I could get to the place I needed to be. I mean, I would imagine as a scientist or an inventor works, I mean, sometimes you have to fail. You have to fail several times, and you have to go through the failures before you see where you're meant to go. But it all worked. It was a part in the middle of the book that ended up being not in the book at all. But the 8 months I spent writing it were not wasted in any sense, because I got to know the characters much better and was able to start afresh and to really know and to have a very clear sight of the end. So, yes, exactly. The detour was helpful in a way.
But if an editor had seen the book at that stage and said, well, I really like that,
I wouldn't have shown it to. I knew it wasn't right. I wouldn't have shown it to an editor.
You knew it wasn't right when you were writing it, but you had to go.
I knew it wasn't right, and I knew that. Well, there's a choice. You have a choice to whether to keep plunging forward or to... And I kept plunging forward for a long time and trying to fix it. And finally it became apparent to me in the trying to fix it what I needed to do, which was not what I had been doing. I saw it, but, you know, I had to go through that to arrive where I needed to be.
But it may not go to waste. It could be for another book.
No, it won't be for another book. It's all in this one. It's all in this one, actually. The work, it's invisible underpinning in this book. There was once in this book a much more complicated subplot about Platt. Platt is a fairly mysterious figure in this book, and we don't know why he got in trouble at school, and that's a little bit left. That's a little bit left. But it was at one time it played more into the book. They are, yes, very perfect looking on the outside, except for Andy, who's Theo's friend, who's sort of the misfit child, the one that doesn't quite the funny looking one, the one that doesn't quite fit in the family photograph, and he is in some way. Theo, by becoming Andy's friend, Andy, the vulnerable child, becomes taken into the family by befriending the vulnerable one. It's something that we all have to come to an understanding of, I think. At a certain age, I think we have to come to terms with what we've done and what we haven't done and what we've left undone, and and not to wallow in guilt about it, to sort of proceed, and to, you know, sometimes what we've done is the only thing that we can.
Because in the beginning, of course, when he is in Amsterdam and he talks about, you know, it was his fault, but of course he was a child, and it's also all about personal responsibility and where your moral compass comes from, and it seemed his moral compass had very much come from his mother, but you say he's actually more like his father.
Well, we don't always get to choose the parent to be like the parent that we love, you know, and that was actually something that I wanted to do in the book, is to have him, without realizing it himself, maybe the reader realizing it a bit before he did, that he's becoming actually more like his father than he thinks. Line. Yes, I printed out a bus schedule, looked up the names, and Google Earth gave me a picture of all the towns, and there it was. Yeah. So yes, the internet is a wonderful thing. Much as you'd think.
That's the power of good writing.
It's really not as much as you'd think. I mean, it was mostly from reading books about furniture. I think of that. There's that great Nabokov, for some reason, and I don't know why, he cut it from his novel Panine, but there was a scene in which Professor Panine is hospitalized, and he teaches himself how to drive a car by manipulating the levers of his hospital cot. And I'm kind of that person. I can teach myself anything from a book. I can,
Come
you
to
know,
my house.
Yes, I can.
I need lots of things fixed.
Well, no, I can. I can sit there with the instruction manual and figure out how to do it. It is perfect, but it's not. I mean, in a way, in a way, I think that when that murder happens, that there's so much else going on. There's so many other immediate, clear, present dangers, and his own life is in danger, and he doesn't really care about that anymore. His own life means nothing to him. So the life of this other person really means nothing to him either. His own life is gone. He's just out. He's out of sight from shore. He's off in another country. One-way ticket, no return. During the conversation at lunch, always pulling out my notebook. It feels very strange not to have it on me now, but yeah, I have tiny little, and I keep them. And the thing, I've always been kind of a hermit about town. I mean, the reclusive tag, I think, came only because I don't do a lot of literary things.
No.
This is my first public reading in London for a decade, for 11 years actually. This is the first time I've appeared in London in public for 11 years. And I've been here lots of times and done lots of things, but I haven't done anything on stage. So I don't know. Does that make me reclusive? I mean,
I don't think so. I think
I don't see a lot of people. I don't like to go out at night. Sometimes even the consciousness of having a social engagement in the evening will sort of wreck my day's writing. I need to know that if it's going well, that I don't have to stop at 6 o'clock and get dressed and go somewhere. If I'm really on a roll, I don't want to see people, don't want to answer the phone. The above. I love that neighborhood. It's where I first lived when I moved to New York and always felt very happy there. And I don't know, I love that neighborhood. And I love New York because I love working in New York. People say New York is not a good place to work, but for me it's always been an excellent place to work because you can walk around and think, and anytime you're lost for a character or a setting, all you have to do is, walk outside and look around, and there it is, what you need, and come back home, and there you are. Yeah. There's sensibility to my work. It's in a much more deeply ingrained sense of Southerners are great raconteurs, they're great storytellers. I grew up hearing stories told. I grew up being read to, hearing magnificent, crazy preachers and wonderful, strange oratory, and somehow that worked its way into my consciousness. I mean, the King James Bible is there, and all sorts of bizarre dialect, private language, which they only spoke among themselves.
Really?
Yes, which was called Dutta, which meant sister in Dutta. And so they were very funny, and they spoke it to themselves, and they spoke it to children, and they spoke it to cats. And no one else could understand it. And many different kinds of talk, and but more than that, a sense of storytelling, constant storytelling. But Stevenson was for this too. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I read in that very, very formative period of childhood, when you're being formed and you don't even know it. I was about 14 years old, and I read that for the first time, and there's something of it in every book I've ever written. Sort of guilt, alienation, questions of self versus persona, doubleness. He was talking about things in questions of surface. I mean, the way that is told, you see perfect Dr. Jekyll on the outside, and then you find his notebook, and you find out what's going on the inside. So definitely, that was a huge influence as well. And but yes, I love Dickens first, last, and center. I mean, I love him. Oliver Twist was the first Dickens I ever read. It was read to me, and David Copperfield's Great Expectations. And I didn't read I felt really lucky actually saving some of them for I couldn't understand them. I mean, I started Little Dorrit many times in childhood, and there was always a part when it would get to the Myrtles that I would get bored and I didn't understand what was going on, and I would stop reading it. But I loved it so much. I mean, Dickens is so complex, and the way that he treats of life is just, there's nothing that Dickens doesn't do well as a writer. In terms of technique, there's nothing he doesn't do well. Suspense, he's a master at. Character, he constructs a beautiful sentence, beautiful metaphor. He's amazing in terms of constructing plot. He's the only writer in human history who could have a character spontaneously combust. He has a character spontaneously human combust in Bleak House, and you believe it, and he makes you believe it. You know, that's really something. That is craftsmanship. That is, you know, he's...
Well,
The Goldfinch, when I was on tour for The Secret History, when I was in Amsterdam on tour for The Secret History, being on tour, I'm not able to write, really, but I'm in new places, meeting new people, things occur to me. It's a wonderful, the time after a book is actually sort of a great sort of open, free time where new ideas rush in and you don't know what's going to hit you or when, so it's an exciting time, and yeah.
And
I've tried to write more quickly, but it's I don't enjoy doing it. It's not fun, and I really do truly believe if there's no fun for the writer, there's no fun for the reader. If it's not fun for me to write it, it's not fun for you to read it.
Well, it's certainly been fun.